Have you ever heard of brutal murders where the killer was actually a close blood relative? Can you imagine it? A small house in the peaceful countryside of India, surrounded by sugarcane fields, being the hiding place of 4 corpses for months without anyone knowing, and even more shocking. The one who did it was the youngest son, just 19 years old, who killed his father, mother, sister, and grandmother, just because of a small conflict. This was the case that shook the entire state of West Bengal. 4 lives were taken, hands tied, drowned and buried right under the floor of their own house. The killer lived with those bodies for 4 months, calmly eating, sleeping, and lying to everyone, saying his family had moved away, and when all the secrets were finally uncovered, the court could only say one thing: this is one of the most brutal and rare cases in the history of Indian law. Let us go together from the very first moment the crime was discovered, through the investigation, the manhunt, and finally the death sentence for a murderer once called the Gentle Son. The case happened at the end of February 2021 in the village of Borosujapur, located in the Kalia Chak area, Malda district, a rural area in northern West Bengal, India. This was the home of the Muhammad family, a Muslim household of 6 people, belonging to the lower middle class, poor but not unstable. The family had a tradition of running small businesses, living in an old single-story house with a compacted dirt floor, metal roof, and a few small gardens behind. The father, Nur Muhammad, about 55 years old, was the main breadwinner, gentle and reserved. The mother, Rubina Begum, 50 years old, was a housewife, described by neighbors as a calm woman who always wore a full headscarf and rarely left the house. The daughter, Morshida Khatun, 17 years old, had just finished high school. The grandmother, Zabeda Bibi, about 75 years old, was elderly and rarely left her room. There were also 2 sons, Arif Muhammad, 21 years old, working far from home, and Asif Muhammad, 19 years old, who would later become the center of the case. Asif was the youngest child in the family. He had not finished his studies, was unemployed, and often scolded by his parents for being lazy and spending money carelessly. According to local people, he showed signs of being withdrawn and easily angered, sometimes disappearing from home all day without explanation. But no one ever thought he could commit a crime. The whole neighborhood was used to seeing Asif pushing a bicycle to buy groceries or sitting alone in front of the house with a dull and confusing look in his eyes to everyone. This was a normal family with no signs of serious conflict. They lived in isolation, not close to neighbors but not involved in quarrels or social troubles. Their old house stood next to a dirt road with little traffic. Quiet, no cameras, no barking dogs, nothing that warned of a tragedy. In the last days of February 2021, the older brother Arif left home to work far away. And just a few days later, the other 4 members of the family, father, mother, sister, and grandmother, all mysteriously disappeared. No one knew that, beneath the compacted dirt floor of that house, 4 bodies had been buried. For many months after the crime, no one in the village or among the relatives suspected anything unusual at the Muhammad family's house. Asif, the youngest son, still moved around as usual. When someone asked about his parents, he only gave a brief answer. The whole family had moved to his mother's hometown in Bihar due to health reasons. Some people found it strange that no one in the family called or showed up at a relative's wedding, but they hesitated to ask more. Since the family had always been very private, the first person to seriously question the disappearance was not a neighbor, but the older brother, Arif Muhammad. Around mid-June 2021, after nearly 4 months working away, Arif returned to Borosujapur village intending to visit home. As soon as he stepped through the gate, he saw the house was almost empty, unusually cold. There were no clear signs of daily life, no voices, no sounds of cooking, and none of the familiar scents from the family's Muslim prayer rituals. Asif appeared calm, But his explanation was unconvincing. When Arif asked why he didn't go with the family to Bihar, Asif only mumbled when asked about the belongings of his parents and sister. He said they left in a hurry. Arif began to feel suspicious. He called their maternal relatives. All of them said they had no idea the family had gone to Bihar. No one had seen them. And there had been no calls from Rubina, Noor, or Morshida, sensing something was very wrong. Arif quietly walked around the house, checking each room. He noticed that the ground in the kitchen area looked like it had been recently dug up and filled again. A damp, foul smell rose faintly from the floor. That was when he decided to call the local police. On June 23, 2021, the Kaliachak police arrived at the scene. They sealed off the house and used shovels to dig up the suspicious patch of ground in the kitchen. After just a few minutes, part of a scalp and a piece of sari cloth began to appear. The whole team fell silent. As they dug deeper, they discovered 4 human bodies wrapped in cloth and buried, stacked on top of each other in the same pit. The victims were all found with their hands tied, mouths covered, and in advanced stages of decomposition. The scene was completely still, as if time had frozen. One officer later said, "No one on the team could imagine that boy had lived with 4 corpses for months, and no one understood how the neighbors never noticed the smell of the bodies." Neighbors began to gather around the house. News spread quickly throughout the village. Many were shocked, unable to believe that the people they saw every day had suddenly become victims of a massacre right inside their own home. An old woman stood outside the yard, crying and murmuring, "I just saw my daughter-in-law during the new year. Now she's under the ground like this." Arif, the one who uncovered the whole truth, collapsed in silence. When the police began to escort Asif out of the house, people threw stones and shouted, demanding punishment on the spot. An angry crowd had to be dispersed by reinforcements from a single suspicion. The case quickly became the center of attention across the state. Major newspapers immediately reported, "Buried entire family under the house floor. 19-year-old arrested for killing parents." And from there, a special investigation journey began. Right after the 4 bodies were unearthed from the kitchen floor, forensic experts, legal authorities, and criminal investigators were sent to Kaliachak. The Muhammad family's house was immediately sealed and turned into a key crime scene for investigation. During the autopsy, police confirmed that all 4 victims had their hands tied and mouths covered with cloth. There were signs of drowning before death. No stab wounds or gunshots were found. Instead, experts observed damage to the chest and lungs, a clear sign of being drowned. A large bucket of water was found nearby, suspected to be where Asif carried out the killings. There were no signs of struggle at the scene. All items in the house remained untouched. With no damage, money, gold, and documents were still intact in the drawers. This ruled out the possibility of robbery. There was also no suicide note or any indication that this was a murder-suicide. Everything pointed to a deliberate, well-prepared murder planned to stay hidden for a long time. Asif Muhammad was arrested on the same day. During interrogation, he initially remained silent and said nothing. His behavior was noted as calm to the point of coldness. He did not shed a tear or show any strong reaction upon seeing the bodies of his parents. Even when asked why he did it, he only replied briefly, "Because I could not stand them anymore." The initial confession shocked the entire investigation team. According to it, on the night of February 28, 2021, Asif secretly put sleeping drugs into the drinks of his family members. Once they were asleep, he tied their hands, covered their mouths, and drowned them one by one in a bucket of water until they stopped breathing. The 4 victims, Father Noor, Mother Rubina, Sister Morshida, and Grandmother Zabida, were all killed in the same night. Another chilling detail: Asif did not kill them for financial reasons or sudden anger, but because he felt humiliated in the family. In his first statement, he said, "They always looked down on me, insulted me, compared me to my brother. That was the reason he quietly planned to kill them all, except for his older brother Arif, who was away working at the time. Initial investigations showed that no one was missing besides the 4 victims already found. The only survivor in the family was Arif, the one who discovered the entire case. There were no other direct witnesses, since the house was isolated and no one heard anything on the night of the murder. However, a few neighbors later confirmed that they had noticed a strange smell coming from Asif's house a few weeks after the family moved out, but thought it was pond water or a dead rat. Some also noticed Asif digging in the kitchen, but he said he was fixing a drainage pipe. Those small details, if noticed earlier, might have led to the case being uncovered sooner. But in the end, it was only when the older brother returned and asked questions that the horrifying truth slowly came to light. When the police exhumed the 4 bodies from beneath the house floor, the only clear and immediate suspect was Asif Muhammad, the sole survivor in the family, and also the one who had lived with the corpses for nearly 4 months. However, to ensure an objective investigation process, the investigation team still considered several initial hypotheses. The robbery and murder hypothesis was immediately ruled out, as no valuables were missing and nothing in the house had been searched. The murder-suicide hypothesis was also unreasonable, as there were no signs of struggle or self-inflicted wounds. The only person still alive was the youngest and also the most capable of committing the crime. The voluntary disappearance hypothesis, at first believed by some, was completely dismissed once the bodies were found buried inside the house. The personal revenge hypothesis had no supporting signs, as there was no evidence of outside conflict or enemies. All directions gradually narrowed down to one conclusion. This was a deliberate murder from within, and Asif was the only person with the time, means, and motive to carry it out. The turning point of the case came from Asif Muhammad's first statement, after more than 24 hours in custody and interrogation. He initially denied all accusations, but failed to provide a reasonable explanation for the disappearance of his entire family. The story that everyone had moved to Bihar collapsed immediately when investigators checked phone records. As there had been no contact from the victim's phone since February, the investigation team seized 2 old mobile phones thrown away in the kitchen, confirmed to belong to the mother and the sister. Both devices had been powered off for months, but the SIM cards still contained the last recorded data. There were no calls or messages after the night of February 28, the same time Asif later admitted to killing them. At the same time, psychological evaluation of Asif began to reveal abnormal signs. He showed long-standing anger toward his parents, feelings of being abandoned and unfairly compared to his older brother Arif. When pressured to give details, Asif initially tried to evade after a night in detention. He became panicked, spoke incoherently, and finally confessed to killing each family member one by one, starting with his grandmother, because he did not want anyone left alive. Without the need for cameras or written notes, the detailed confession, his unstable behavior, and the physical evidence at the scene became the decisive factors that made the case impossible to deny. After many hours of continuous interrogation, Asif Muhammad finally bowed his head and confessed to all of his actions. There was no lawyer present at the time of the initial confession. Asif recounted the events in a flat, almost emotionless voice, chilling even seasoned investigators, according to his statement. On the night of February 28, 2021, Asif prepared sedatives purchased from a local pharmacy. He secretly mixed the drugs into the drinks of his family members after dinner. As each person gradually fell into a state of unconsciousness, Asif began to act. He used cloth to tie their hands and cover their mouths to prevent cries for help, then dragged each person into the kitchen area. Asif stated that the first person he killed was his grandmother Zabeda Bibi. The reason was cold and direct. He did not want her to wake up and see what was happening. Next was his mother Rubina, then his sister Morshida, His father, Nur Muhammad, was the last. All of them had their heads submerged in a bucket of water until they stopped breathing. There was no knife, no blood splatter, no screams. It was a silent and calculated method of killing that lasted for hours inside the same house, after killing all 4 people. Asif dug a large pit beneath the kitchen floor by himself. He buried the bodies stacked on top of each other, covered them with soil, compressed the ground, and cleaned the scene. In his statement, Asif said that afterward he slept very well, and the next morning he went outside as if nothing had happened. The most infuriating detail was not the method of murder, but his behavior afterward. Asif lived in that house for months, eating and carrying on daily life directly above the place where his parents, sister and grandmother were buried. When asked whether he felt haunted or remorseful, Asif replied that at the time he felt relieved. There was no one left to scold him anymore. The motive for the crime did not come from money or property disputes. Asif stated that he did not need his family's money. The cause, according to his confession, was purely psychological, a feeling of being looked down upon, constantly compared to his older brother, and forced to become someone they wanted him to be. Long accumulated resentment, combined with a distorted personality and lack of control, turned into an extreme decision to erase the entire family. For investigators, this was not just a murder case. It was a clear example of a family tragedy rooted in psychological disorder, simmering hatred, and the terrifying coldness of someone who carried the title of son. Asif Muhammad was arrested directly at the scene, the very house where he had lived for months with the bodies buried beneath the ground. The arrest took place on June 23, 2021, just a few hours after his older brother Arif reported the case to the police and investigators uncovered the bodies. The arrest process did not last long. There was no chase and no resistance when police handcuffed him. Asif showed no panic or surprise. He was calm, almost cold. Villagers gathered outside the house after hearing the news. Many were furious and shouted demands for immediate punishment. Police had to deploy security forces to prevent unrest after nearly 2 years of detention. Witness statements, forensic examinations, and case preparation. The trial of Asif Muhammad was held at the Malda District Court. There, Asif was charged with multiple offenses under the Indian Penal Code, Section 302 murder, Section 201 concealment of crime and destruction of evidence, Section 307 attempted murder, as early signs suggested he might have intended to kill his brother as well if he had been present at the time. In court, Asif admitted to all charges, however. What shocked many people was his attitude. He did not cry, did not ask for leniency, and did not present any mitigating circumstances or personal explanations. When asked whether he felt remorse, Asif simply said he had thought it through very carefully. In the verdict, the presiding judge described the case as one of the most brutal, cold-blooded, and rare crimes in legal history. He stated that the defendant not only killed his family, but also lived as if nothing had happened for months. This level of emotional detachment was described as astonishing. In March 2024, the court sentenced Asif Muhammad to death. The sentence was issued after the judicial panel agreed that there were no reasonable mitigating factors, and that the defendant posed an extreme danger to society. As of now, no formal appeal has been filed by the defendant or defense counsel. Asif remains in custody at a central prison in West Bengal, awaiting the automatic appeal review at the High Court, a mandatory step in death penalty cases in India. The case ended with the highest sentence available under Indian law. But for many people, especially those who once knew the Muhammad family, the loss remains a wound that will never fully heal, even though justice has been carried out. So in the end, was justice truly served? Or was it simply a sentence pronounced 4 lives were lost inside their very own home? No strangers, no outside enemies, only one son, carrying the family name, the same blood, the bond of kinship, and in just one night, an entire family was erased. Asif Muhammad now faces the death penalty. But that sentence cannot bring back the parents to their surviving son. It cannot erase the months in which the victims lay buried in silence, beneath the very ground where they once lived, once ate, once prayed. This case is not just a story of crime. It is a chilling warning about the quiet tragedies within families. When resentment is ignored, when emotional wounds are unseen, when violence does not need fists, but grows silently through years of neglect, is Asif the only one to blame? Or is it also the indifference, the lack of connection, and the invisible pressure that pushed a person closer to the edge? What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts below.